Righty, well, it is 10 o'clock. Can everybody hear me?
Loud and clear.
All righty, good deal. Good morning, Kentucky Leads friends. Happy Saturday. It seems like, I don't know for you guys, but it seems like everybody else I've talked to has been like, this week has just been crazy. There's just been so much going on this week. And I feel like it's always that way. Like those couple of weeks before spring break, it's almost like there's like those couple of weeks before spring break, those couple of weeks before Christmas, and then the end of the school year, right? That's like, is that even real? But we are here. We are together. I appreciate everyone who is here, and we do apologize for the sort of short notice on the changing of scheduling. We did not realize that Easter was coming so soon this year, and so we do apologize, and we do appreciate those who are able to be here and understand for those who cannot. I'll go ahead and get us started this morning. Just a few reminders to be mindful of your mic. Please keep yourself muted unless you want us to hear what you have to say. This is a recorded session, so you can go back and utilize these videos whenever you need. Please join from your computer or a laptop. You just seem to have better connectivity. We don't seem to have as many issues instead of like joining from your phone. You know, sometimes you have to, but just know that you're going to be able to connect a little bit easier and better if you're on your laptop. Someone muted me. Just a reminder to keep your video on. If you have some connectivity issues, again, if you start having bandwidth issues, feel free to turn that off. Just try to keep it on as much as you can. We understand. Please log in with your district account. That's really important because if you log in with maybe a Yahoo or a Hotmail or whatever, depending on your age, it could even be an AOL, then you will not be able to have access to all of the things in Teams. So please just make sure you're using your district account. And of course, make sure you take a break as needed. So if you need to take a break, you need to step away, please feel free to do that. Just put a BRB in the chat, turn off your camera, turn off your mic, and do take care of yourself. Just a few reminders of our team norms to participate with respect, to welcome the multiple viewpoints that we may hear across our team's scholars. Devote your attention to those speaking and sharing, ask questions for clarification. Be courageous and speak your truth, but also own the intentions and the impacts of that truth. And most importantly, just honor our time together. We know it is a Saturday, but we do appreciate when your attention is here. We always, every time that we meet with presenters, one of the things that we say at the Leads team says is like, this group is so bright. They're so attentive. They're so intelligent. Like, oh my gosh, it's so amazing. And we know that part of that is because you guys choose to be here actively, to be here and to participate and engage. So again, we just appreciate you guys as always and appreciate you honoring this time that we have. Just a few reminders on how to stay connected. Your meeting link, the directory, the discussion board, and any sort of related document that you might need for Teams is in our SharePoint site. If you missed February's session, it was on family school partnerships and special education. You can find a link to that session in SharePoint. Our agenda for today looks something like this. As always, there's a little bit of give and take with a few minutes here and there. We are going to be doing some updates and things until about 10:10. We're going to hand it over to a friend of mine, Skip, here in just a few minutes. We'll have a break around 10:50. So if you can on until that break, that would be great. But again, we understand you're at home and it's a Saturday, so feel free to take the breaks that you need. We'll have breakout rooms around 11:35, and we will start wrapping up around 11:50. Mike has a couple of updates for us, a couple of reminders. So Mike, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you, Shasta. Good morning, everybody. Great to have you here. I'm going to share some updates. So there's some things, if you could write them down, some important dates and things to think about, or just bring up a document so you can type a few things in. So I want to give you a heads up on that first. So Shasta's got on screen here. Congrats to all our cohort 3 scholars. This is your last Saturday seminar, and it's a great time, exciting time for you guys. Both I know from the things you've shared with us about what you've learned, but then also you get some of your Saturday mornings back too. So we're excited for you guys, excited for what you've gone through, been a part of our family here for the really last 24 months, 2 years. So congrats to all of you. It's really, really an amazing time. So by saying that, we also want to let you know too that you guys are always welcome for cohort 3 to continue to join us on the Saturday seminars. If you can also still have access to the recorded sessions and look at those. And the reason I say that is new things are coming all the time, and we really do try to incorporate those into our Saturday seminars. Things going on with the state, changes that are going on, etc. So we just want to make you apprised that you're always welcome to seminars and always welcome to access the recorded ones too. For some reason, if you're unable to access those in the future, just give Becca or one of us an email and we'll get that worked out to you or worked out for you. So congrats. We're going to do a more formal thank you and acknowledgement at the Summer Summit that's coming up. And Jess has got the dates on there. So that's an important one. We'd love to have all of you all here during those 2 days. We'll cover your mileage like we've done in the past. We'll cover your hotel room, etc. It is going to be in Louisville at the Marriott East. But it'll also be a more formal time to recognize all of you all in cohort 3 for what you've accomplished. So I wanted to make you aware of that too. The other things to think about is dealing with for those of you that are continuing on cohort 4, starting to really think about and getting locked into your summer classes for those of you that are taking summer courses. If you haven't already spoken with your advisor, please do that as well. Then there's another bit of information I wanted to share with you, and it kind of relates to it does relate to our summit in June on the 28th and 29th. The Friday the 28th is going to be, for those of you that can make it there, it's just a meet and greet. We're going to have a speaker, and I wanted to make you all aware of that. And so it's just a nice time, kind of informal time. We'll have some light snacks and things there too. And then on Saturday, we'll have our traditional presentation of various speakers. We'll have our panel discussion from doses. It's been very popular in years past. Those sessions, though, are going to be aligned to, and this is important, I wanted you to write this down as well. KDE has developed what they're calling their North Star priorities. And this is very important. These are 8 priorities that the agency is really aligning their work with. And all of you, moving forward need to be aware of that. You'll be hearing more about it in the months and years to come. But these 8 priorities I'm going to share with you. So we're going to have speakers that are going to share around most of the priorities. We've really tried to line them. We won't have enough time to cover all the priorities. But most importantly, I want to make you aware of these larger North Star priorities. So I'm going to read you the 8. Number 1, effective instruction. Number 2, bridging preschool to kindergarten. Number 3, stakeholder engagement. Number 4, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Number 5, discipline practices. Number 6, attract, recruit, and retain staff, teachers, etc. Number 7, parents and families. And then number 8, foundations of compliance. So all these priorities are really anchored in the larger vision that the agency has, as well as OSEP's vision. As we've mentioned too, over the past couple of years, the agency KDE has to submit annual performance reports, and they have specific indicators that they have to report up to OSEP, the feds on. And so KDE has really worked hard to develop these priorities so they align with those specific indicators. So long-winded version to share or to say, hey, these North Star priorities are important. Keep those in mind. And it's great to have everybody here on Saturday morning. And I'll turn it back to you, Ms. Shasta.
Righty. Thanks, Bill, for getting those. I was trying to find a document that had those North Star priorities in it. So I appreciate you doing that. Just a couple of other reminders too, for those of you in cohort 4 who are continuing on. A couple of things. Just don't forget, if you miss a session, right? You get 2 sort of like freebies, right? You get 2 because we understand it's a 2-year thing. It's a Saturday. So note that, but also make sure that when you do miss, that you are filling out that Saturday seminar review form and sending that over to Becca. Also, don't forget that there is some conversations happening in the Reflect and Respond discussion board. So just make sure you're over in there. There are some really good information, some really good questions that I noticed. I try to check in at least once a week over there. There's one asking for some information around HI and some perspectives on P20 education. So you guys make sure you check that out. Is there any questions before I pass the stage over to Skip? All righty. Well, let me introduce you to Skip Cleavinger. Like I said, Skip and I have known each other for a little while. When I first started at KDE as a ELs a disabilities consultant, Skip was one of my role models. He was a EL coordinator at the time. He's also a former school psych, and just so knowledgeable and such an expert in this area. He is currently the DEIB consultant over at GREC. And again, he just has like a wealth of knowledge in this area of considerations for serving MLs or multilingual learners with potential, maybe, disabilities. And so he's going to be sharing some of that information with you. If you guys have questions for Skip, drop those over in the chat or raise your hand. And then when he sort of has a natural pause, we'll make sure that we address anything that's in the chat. Or again, if it feels sort of urgent, just go ahead and raise your hand and we'll make sure that Skip has an opportunity to answer that. We have also built in some time for some questions at the end. So feel free to consider that as well. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Skip. Go ahead.
Great. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Cool. All right, great. It's great to be with you, and I really appreciate the opportunity. So thanks, Shasta, and that's very humbling that you considered me a role model. But anyway, because this is a daunting field, it's a really hard field, and it's humbling to me just about every day. So what I'm going to do, I'm already kind of having a little bit of a panic. We have a new desktop up here in the office, and I'm realizing it may not let me share my slides, so we might take like a real quick break, but let me just try it. Let's see.
And you should be able to in Teams.
Yeah.
I know you guys over in GREC, you guys use Google, right? You use that crazy Google Meet. I don't know what y'all are doing
Use
over
that.
there. But nonetheless, up in Teams, towards your leave button, you'll see a share. There you go. We see it. You're
All
good.
right, cool. All right, good. Well, I can't see anybody, so yeah, definitely Shasta, be my vision, and just let me know if anybody has questions or anything like that. All right, we'll get started. I realized at about 8 o'clock last night, as I was continuing to revise, I have way too many slides, and I'll show you my topics in a moment, but I'll really need your help to kind of guide this so that we use your time most appropriately. We don't have a long time. I'm going to start my timer incidentally. We don't have a lot of time. So anyway, here's a shared resource folder. There's not a lot of stuff in it right now, but I like to create these because it allows you, let's see, you don't have editing privileges yet, but you will. So you could add resources to it, but I like to, as things come across, I like to add things to it. So I think right now there's a toolkit from the Department of Education, which is really great. I only gave you the chapter that relates to exceptional education for multilingual learners, but there's a full toolkit that's available, and so it's great. I also gave you Shasta's wonderful document that is in the KDE website, so that's in there. And I can't recall the other things right now. Let me see if I can take a look at it myself. Yeah, okay, so we have the toolkit, we have the Dear Colleague letter. I keep this at my side all the time. And I don't know, you don't want to be ringing alarm bells in this field. You want to always support people and be a source of technical assistance. But there are very specific Office for Civil Rights that leadership and technical assistance that's in that letter. So please go in there and check that out. There's a memo in there from Roger Lacey that's from years ago. We may cover that, or we may not. So okay, I am going to try to use. I'm an old dog, and I've seen it go from limited English proficient to English learner, which is the current federal term. But the term that is knocked about in the field is multilingual learner. And I've given you the reasons there. It's very asset based and culturally responsive. It's really neurologically correct. the first day that a kid is sitting in a classroom receiving all English instruction, some really amazing things are happening neurologically, and the pathways are being altered. They're searching for meaning, they're searching for connection, and that's what the brain's wired to do. So I love that term. Now, it's the problem with it is that there are English learners who are multilingual. They're all English learners are multilingual, but not all multilingual learners qualify anymore for the English learner status, or they might not have ever qualified. So I probably will go back and forth using those two terms. So here's my thinking. This is where I need your help. So I do have a lot of considerations prior to the referral, because this is a field, or this is an area that you're going to come across as a dose where a case is going to land at your feet and you're not sure if everything that's happened before is appropriate. And I do think that we need that lens. So I do have some things prior to the referral. Also, definitely referral considerations. So as you're sitting in that first meeting and all this documentation is in front of you, you'll be having to scrutinize several things. Quality of core, the impact of the interventions, and so on. Are there any other reasons that they could be struggling? Absolutely. So it's really tough. And I have a school psychology brain. You're probably the one group that I feel least comfortable meeting your needs, because you have a very specific set of needs, and I'm used to working with teachers, curriculum coordinators, school psychs, speech paths, but you guys are in a really special and important position, and I just want to make sure I'm doing well for you. So evaluation design is where where that memo might come into play, and we'll have some discussion about that maybe. So documentation, documentation, documentation. It's all about documentation. And then placement and SDI. So, the IEP and the program services plan, which is the English learner plan that states their goals and their accommodations and so on. So we'll talk about that briefly toward the end. So here's just and I'll touch on these. Well, let me just stop. So can just a couple people chime in and just say, Skip, in this limited amount of time, please guide us toward, maybe referral, or maybe guide us toward that evaluation. I get a lot of questions about evaluation or whatever. Does anybody have input at this point? I'll go back to topics.
Hi, this is Marty Escalante. In Montgomery County, I'm the dose here. I think some of the things that we run into are when we talk about referral, how to tease out disability versus difference, whether it is lack of instruction, because we will have students move here that have not had any formal education, and they'll be in third grade. And then also the eligibility, because we always worry, you don't want to overqualify, but I feel like sometimes we lean more toward underqualifying. So I think those would be some of the things that would be of use to me, and I would hope some of the other doses. The other thing I always wonder about, I am a speech pathologist previously, and I've always wondered, like psychologists, like should they be giving testing with an interpreter? Are there Spanish versions of tests? That's typically the second language or first language of students we have. So those are just some things in my mind. I don't know if that's what everybody else is thinking too, but just wanted to share that.
You're ringing my bells. That's great. That's really helpful. So why don't we proceed? I see my timer, losing seconds here. So based on that, I'll tell you what, we're just going to go very quickly then through this pre-referral section. I hate pre-referral because it makes you think we're on our way to a referral. So this is prior to the referral, all the things that are happening. I do think some points to consider are, this is a really fast growing group in Kentucky right now. So 44%. So, Montgomery County, I'm also working in Russell County, counties that have not traditionally seen a lot of EL, growth. or students in general, really. Paintsville Independent, I was just there in January. So these are counties that are still trying to build their EL program. And Castaneda versus Pickard, which was a federal court decision, said that you cannot, immersion is not a way to, teach English learners the English language. So we're kind of building things at the same time. The other thing that I think is really important to know is that most of our increase is being driven by new arrivals. So that's a whole different kettle of fish, and it's another presentation. And just the open invitation to you, anytime you want to talk more, we can talk. And I'll put the slides in the resource folder, but my cell phone is in there, and we can talk more, or email, or whatever, or I can visit you. I think the other thing is that MLs are inherently at risk for the obvious reasons. Let's see, the interesting thing is Alfredo Artiles and Alba Ortiz, who works quite a bit in the state, by the way, they are demonstrating, it's just they're learning English, but they're demonstrating things that appear to be disabilities or characteristics of a disability. So the list there, I won't read them to you, but all those things are basically something that a gen ed teacher or even an ELD teacher could come to you and say, I think this child has a disability. You see here some other things from Alfredo and Alba, just slow to begin tasks and so on, emotional behavioral difficulties. We have a lot of kids here who've experienced trauma. So Jeanette Klingner, another big thought leader in the field, she just compared and contrasted, things that are associated with a disability and things that are associated just with learning English. Newcomers, I already mentioned them. They are our biggest group in terms of growing. And it's, so I was with the educational recovery leaders last Tuesday, and one of them said, it's just a different game now. It really is. They're showing, it's not just Fayette County, Warren, Jefferson anymore. It's the small counties are receiving kids. So just some thoughts about newcomers there, and I apologize for going fast, but I really do want to get to some of the things that were mentioned. So, okay, but you'll have all these slides. I write my slides kind of like an article, so you'll have a lot of stuff in there. To your point, we do over and under identify MLs for special education in our state, and they're both common. They tend to be, according to the researchers, a district that has a lot of EL programming, like Jefferson County or Warren. They tend to under-identify because they say, okay, this kid is just an EL, and we just need to, let them go through what we have. Then the districts that don't have a lot of support tend to over-identify because they have that, that ethic. We care about children. And so they think, well, even if I have a resource teacher working with them, that's better than nothing. So I'm using 0.75. So, on either side of 1, 0.75 and below is considered underrepresentation, and 1.25, anything there and over is considered overrepresentation. So Warren and Fayette are just, there's no relationship. If you're an ML, you might be in special ed, you might not. There's really no relationship there. Whereas Jefferson County, you're less likely to be in special ed if you're a multilingual learner. And we need to find them, as the point was so well made a few minutes ago. We do need to find them. Davis County's in the same boat. Logan, and I'm working in Logan a lot right now, so I ran theirs. They're at 1.3, so you're 1.3 times more likely to be in special ed if you're a multilingual learner. It's easy to calculate these, and I would call me up after I get the slides in the folder, or ask Shasta to get a hold of me. But it is very easy to do that. You can look at your district's equity dashboard. You can do it there. You could calculate one, and I have a really nice video of Florence Chang showing how to run some of these ratios. So I like this. This comes from Alba, who's a very, just kind of down to earth, very level-headed person. And she just said, basically, there's only 3 types of MLs. There's the one who is in the process of learning English. They just need more time. And instruction is not necessarily the issue. They're not disabled, and They're just doing their thing. Type 2 is a different situation, and it was referred to a few minutes ago. That's a situation in which there is a mismatch between what they need in the instructional environment. They're not disabled. They just need to have better instruction, better core, better interventions, whatever. So that's the type 2. And type 3 is the kid who does have a disability and needs specially designed instruction. And I've always felt this way. RTI is a great model for delineating, this whole model. So type 1 will stay in core, type 2 they need interventions, and type 3 and beyond would be tier 3 and possibly going into special education. I do, I always want to say this. You may not, I'm probably preaching to the choir here. There are, and I just heard one last week from a very reputable district, that you have to be in the country for a certain amount of time before you can be referred, or you have to have a certain proficiency level before you can be referred. That is absolutely false. You have the 2015 Dear Colleague letter in your book or in your shared folder. They must be located, identified, and evaluated in a timely manner. So you can't, a lot of times it's unspoken, but even that, I think if somebody were to call attention to it, OCR would definitely have something to say. So we do need to ensure that we're finding them and doing what's necessary. Okay. All right. So intervention phases, I won't touch base here because I think we do need to talk about what was raised before. But, I like to use a plant analogy. We have a nice, healthy, wonderful plant. For me, that's a new plant because and my wife can do a lot better job than I can. But once we start to see signs of distress, that's with an English learner. And my kind of maxim for that is I always listen to the ELD teacher or the parents. They're the two sources who will are very important. The parents, it's obvious, but an ELD teacher, basically, she or he is always kind of thinking about a child in the context of other children who are like them. And so when they come to somebody, an intervention person or you or whatever, and they say, this kid, there's something going on. I always listen to that. That's always a sign that there's some struggle going on. And we really do want to avoid getting to the point that you look like a plant that I've been taking care of, which, it can be revived, but it's going to take some work. So I like to consider this. Why are plants 2 and 3 in trouble? Is it watering issues, light issues, nutrients, and disease? And I think that's a great metaphor. So if another gardener, someone who's more experienced, were to have had these plants from the start, would we be in this situation? And I think that's a great lens for you to address this idea. Okay, I've got them here. Now I'm starting to tease apart. Is this a disability or is this just a lack of really good instruction? So hope that lens would help. So we're moving to a point at which a team agrees. This is in the intervention phases. And I use team very, very explicitly there because I think it needs to be a team of people. And they need to decide if they're not responding to core. And that's also very intentional. Core instruction, it's been really interesting. I retired from Warren County and we had our core issues. Oh my gosh. They still have a lot of issues with their core instruction, particularly for MLs, kids who are in special education, and so on. Every district has those. That's a national concern. So at some point we have to decide, okay, core has not been sufficient, and so we need to move into some interventions. And that just takes a team approach. You need to have someone on the team who really has expertise in second language acquisition. That ELD teachers, that's a theme that'll keep coming up. They need to be on the ARC team. They need to be in the intervention phases. They need to be helping making these decisions. Oftentimes in Warren, we really had to beat this down. When we started benchmarks 15 years ago, it was very easy for an English learner to come into Warren County in August, take the benchmark test in September, and bang, they're in tier 2 instruction or tier 2 interventions. Not appropriate. You cannot do that. And so I was just working with a county last week, and they're considering putting some brakes on that. So maybe if you're in your first 3 months in the United States, or 6 months, maybe you're not going to take a benchmark, or you might, I don't know, but they're trying to think through that, because if you take a benchmark test and you're brand new to the United States, you're not really getting any useful information. The language load of the test actually becomes what the test is measuring. So it's a measure of English. It's not really a measure of math or reading anymore. So I would recommend stopping that. This idea that if you're 20th percentile or below, you're automatically in tier 2. Really think carefully about how that's implemented in your district. And I was just with our GREC dose network a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about this particular thing. And so I think their comments were, we really don't have a lot of control over that particular side of things. That's still in the gen ed world. So we feel like we have a loss of control. So my advice there would be to gain some control, create a team. We had a wonderful team in Warren County that had the special ed director, myself, and the intervention director, two school psychologists, and always an ELD specialist, whoever could make it. And we would just sit and try to make decisions about students. So that team approach is really important. Of course, anytime you're making decisions, there needs to be a paradigm, there needs to be a protocol, and it needs to be robust, and needs to be systematic. So, again, to the point earlier, this is, a lot of people are trying to figure out, is this disability, or is this just language and cultural difference? You can make those decisions. They're typically going to be a clinical decision, but that clinical process needs to be very, very formal. And that's my issue with some school psychologists who are considered the ELD, school psychologists. They're the ones who do those evaluations. And their process cannot be replicated by someone who comes along after them to do a reevaluation. Or they leave the district and they go somewhere else. And so it has not been systematized. And I would really consider, if you're a dose, that you say, okay, we're going to do this, but we're going to come up with a system for doing it. And it's going to involve a team of people. The person may leave, but their position is always on the team. I won't stay long here. It's just that RTI, the federal law requires us to use interventions that have been, are evidence-based for the ML population, and there just aren't any right now. Julia Esparza Brown has come up with a suggestion for altering interventions, and it's called the PLUS system. We've had Julie in the state as well to do some training, and we might have her back, but it's just, there's not a lot out there right now. So we're using off-the-shelf interventions with MLs, and it's at times it can be great, and at other times it's not so great. Okay. All right. So I think we're in the appropriate spot given the feedback earlier. So this is these next few slides are about that discussion at that first ARC meeting when you're considering the referral. And I think the point was so well made. It's an idea that has this kid had the opportunity to learn? The law actually states that phrase, we have to ensure that they've had opportunities, and that they've been appropriate. That includes core academic and also English language development. So all those things are wrapped up. And so I feel for the ARC members. They have a lot of things resting on their shoulders. So we're trying to determine if they've had equitable access and opportunities to learn. So core instruction will be scrutinized at this point. I would argue that your gen ed colleagues, they need to be scrutinizing all the way along as well, to ensure that, are they receiving enough English language development time? I feel bad for the districts that don't have, Paintsville just hired someone, but prior to that, they didn't have anyone. So we're relying on immersion. And so, you had, as was mentioned earlier, you have kids arriving in the country who had sporadic or interrupted schooling. Sometimes they've not been able to go to school for quite a long time, and then they arrive. And there are lots of issues to consider. So also the nature, as I mentioned a couple seconds ago, the nature and the impact of the interventions must be considered really carefully. So the nature refers to, was it something you just grabbed and it wasn't appropriate at all for MLs, and you're just using it? And I'm getting into some of these conversations with science of reading, science of reading specialists, because a lot of their work is predicated on someone who's heard the sounds of English all their lives. And so we have kids who speak Arabic and Somali, and they just have not heard the sounds of English. So phonological awareness is a real tough road. It's a real steep road for them. So considerations need to be made for that. And then the impact of the interventions. And I would argue that that's where you can get a lot of bang for your buck and trying to sort out disability and difference. So yeah, you're going to be scrutinizing two areas: the degree to which they've had strong English language development instruction, and then the core academic areas. And as I said earlier, these ELD teachers need to be included. And I hear from a lot of them, they don't get to go to PLCs. They don't get involved in the interventions. They're not on the ARC teams, and they really need to be there. They possess information about the kid, if it's their ELD teacher, and their growth in relation to similar peers, which is a really important normative comparison. And they also understand second language acquisition, and they know the challenges of that. They know they can actually help you scrutinize. Do you think that the quality of ELD here has been sufficient? Because at the end of the day, we're going to have to say they've had an opportunity to learn, and we still suspect that there's a disability. So again, core. And here's the reason I put these slides in, you guys, is that I think this is part of our scrutinization, is that it's really easy for a kid who's not been, subject to a lot of instruction prior to coming to the United States. And now they're here and they just have a lot going on. They have emotional issues going on. They have just basic need issues that are being addressed by family resource, and all these things are happening. What tends to happen is that the academic departments, the gen ed folks, will start to drop the rigor. And so they're no longer really aligned to grade level standards. And so that's a real issue. And that's just a tough issue. But multilingual learners, according to the civil rights that they have, and also just good second language development, theory and practice, they need to be in standards aligned, rigorous instruction with a lot of support. Instructional strategies that are proven for MLs in the gen ed framework. I was just saying to Shasta earlier, we had a wonderful training at GREC yesterday, and she was great at just demonstrating very small things that a teacher can do to open up access points for multilingual learners. And so we need to have a lot of training for teachers to be able to do that. Yeah, the degree that they're engaging and talking, a lot of times, well, I will ask school psychologists if they're working on a case, just go with that kid, watch them for a couple of hours, just travel with them and look at, first of all, how much they are talking and having opportunities to talk. And then secondly, are the supports there for them to talk? Are there sentence starters? Are there graphic organizers? Are there just kind of typical tools that we use to support someone so that they can start participating? And oftentimes those things aren't there. Are we capitalizing and leveraging their strengths? I was in a district not too long ago that did not permit native language use at all. In fact, the kids were punished. And it's a breach of civil rights, of course. But you're also missing out on a huge strength that kid is bringing to the class. So we're trying to maintain the intellectual nature of learning, and you kind of cut them off at the knees. No, you're not going to be able to participate because we don't allow your native language here. So it's really important to to have some language support there so that the native language can be used in the classroom. And I know what you're thinking already. It's not easy. This is not easy stuff. We're talking about things like peers who are bilingual and speak the language of the student in question. We're talking about ways to translate writing that they do. They're going to write maybe in their native language about a content area, and we need to be able to translate that. We need for them to talk maybe and use some sort of device to interpret what they're saying in their native language. So these are tough, and they're tough. I'll just stop there. They're really tough. They're designed. Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to move on because I'm afraid we're going to run out of time here. But all these formative and summative assessments, the access test that the kids, ML or EL kids take, we don't get the results back until months after they've taken the evaluation. So they're really not useful things for us at that point. And formative and summative assessments are really critical to know how a kid is progressing. Social emotional supports, cultural responsiveness. Okay. The English language development instruction, everything that I mentioned earlier should be here. So we do have language standards in our field, and we need to be adhering to those. We need to be aligning everything that we do to the competencies of the student. We need to be using evidence-based instructional strategies. We need to have a research-based ELD curriculum. I'm saying all these hard things. These are hard, but they're really important if an ARC team is going to be able to say at the end of that meeting, despite opportunities to learn, we still suspect there's a disability. Okay. Yeah, supported. This goes back to what I said in core. It's, we're inviting them to participate in the academic practices. So they're being, invited to describe things, to wonder about things, to question, evaluate, compare, and all those great academic practices. But they need to be supported to do that. They can do it in their native language for sure. Absolutely. But we need to have supports in order for that to happen, of course. But then within a few weeks, as their social English skills begin to really build, then we're in a whole different spot. And we need to, again, continue to support and invite them into the space where we're engaging in those practices, describing, wondering, and so on. They need to be talking every single day. And they won't initially, of course. But that opportunity needs to be there every single day. Supported opportunities every day. Vocabulary development, language focus to content instruction, opportunities to engage with kids who have strong English proficiency, and they could be bilingual kids, but are also our native English speakers. They need to be engaged with those kids as soon as possible. So here's our challenges. I've mentioned a few of them already, but teacher training programs are not adequately preparing new teachers, and we're working on that. There's a lot of us in the state who are trying to kind of work our way into that part of it. The working partnership between Gen Ed and EL teachers is often not that great. I mean, they consider Gen Ed says, well, it's the EL teacher's responsibility, and they need to really learn English before they can benefit from content. Absolutely false. First of all, again, it's a breach of civil rights, but second of all, it just doesn't make any sense. We need to be core and language are both kind of traveling together. And as I said, there's a tendency to simplify. Okay. And I went back a slide. I apologize. Here, the last point is that I'm encountering this all the time in districts that I'm serving. There's this tendency to believe that they can't benefit from any academic particularly rigorous academic content, unless they're proficient in English. And that's just has been proven over and over again that that's not correct, and it's also counterproductive. So if we have situations in which newcomers are being removed from opportunities to participate in grade level core classes, that may be a violation of their civil rights. I would check the Dear Colleague letter. Some programs do remove them for a short period of time, but there's still academics going on in the newcomer context, but they're sent back to their general setting as soon as possible. So the second item, so we've evaluated, the quality of core instruction, which is academic and language. Now we're looking at other causes. So what can be already said earlier that they can demonstrate the same characteristics as students with a mild disability. Sorry about the typo. So there's that, okay, they have a lot of attentional difficulties. Well, yeah, they're learning English. So there's that to consider. Their families, and they can also be going through a lot of things. So economic disadvantage, just access to basic services. We have a community partnership here in Warren County, and we were very busy during COVID and the tornado, just ensuring that our immigrant and refugee families were just getting what they needed to get through those two horrific events. So, but those things will impact academic and behavioral functioning in school.
If I
So I
wanted to
just
let you
said,
know, we got about 5 minutes before break too. Just kind of give you a heads up about time.
I appreciate it. Thank you. So what I did is, this slide, I won't go through it all, but that's just there for you. I just wanted to brainstorm, okay, what are the things that I would look to, I'll put it in your resource folder. I have a document that I use to just start collecting information from a variety of areas. I didn't automatically give it to you because it's typically a gen ed side. It really should be done before it gets to you, but you may just want to see it. But these are the things in that first ARC that, again, I hope that it's been addressed prior to getting to that meeting. But there are things that I would, consider, as you're trying to separate difference and disability, which is a really important thing to do. But this is great because I think we'll end right with evaluation design. So the challenges of evaluating a multilingual learner, whether they have a disability or not, are just very clear. So we have these English tests. We already talked briefly about Spanish versions of the test and so on. But the ARC members are going to have to tease apart some really significant factors as they're determining whether, this is culture and language or it's a disability. So we could have possible instructional shortcomings. Might have social and emotional and psychological status that's really impacting what's going on academically or behaviorally. So the gathering of data is just critically important. And it's very different from what we would do for a native English speaking student. Just quickly, I remember when ADHD I was a school psychologist, when it was first considered as other health impairment. It was a really big deal. It was in 90 or 91. I can't remember the year, but we basically had to rule out in our evaluations depression, all sorts of other things that could be creating attentional difficulties and hyperactivity. So this is the same kind of thing. So we'll be kind of throwing the kitchen sink at the case with regard to data collection. So we'll use formal and informal assessments, surveys, progress monitoring data generated during the intervention phases. They are critical. They actually become, this is more for the school psychologists to hear, but they become part of the evaluation. We want a thorough academic and language progress status done. Again, access is not going to be your friend when it comes to current language functioning. Parent and teacher interviews are just, particularly parents. When I was a school psychologist doing these evaluations, I would spend, multiple sessions with the parents talking about what was going on. I'd go to the home and observe, of course, observations in the school as well. So I think this is a good stopping point because we have a couple minutes, and let me stop sharing and so I can look at you guys and just see what are you thinking so far? Anything's popping out, and then after the break, I can maybe come back around and hit some things. Oh, I see the meeting chat is blowing up. Good. Okay. District had to cut the number of EL teachers. Okay. And I see that Shasta has put Alba Ortiz. There's a great interview with her. Okay. SLI versus EL when the errors are typical Spanish. Yeah. Those are potential referrals, aren't they? I had a kindergarten teacher who was so concerned, and she filled out a referral for a speech language evaluation, and it was because the kid would not pronounce the J sound. And, so we just, again, it's educating teachers about the sounds of Spanish, the sounds of Arabic, the sounds of Somali, and we really look at the differences between the sound structures and also the alphabetic structures. So reading Arabic, is a different thing. It's right to left. That's the easiest. That's the low-hanging fruit. But there are all sorts of other ways that language is written that are very different from English. Are there certain scores on the access test that mean their first languages? Oh, very good question. There, and access isn't going to help you at all with regard to native language proficiency. But what I might give you, and I'll put it in the folder, is a little short oral language assessment that Alba Ortiz developed. And so what you can do is do that in the native language with an interpreter, of course, and then also do it in English. And so I've seen cases just recently where a kid they were very close to being referred, and they gave Alba a scale and they scored perfectly on it. So in the native language, I should say. So that just means that they're learning English. And I see we're at our time to break, so we'll come back.
Yeah, we'll pause and take a break. Come back, friends, at 11 o'clock. You're welcome to stay on and keep asking questions. Like during the break, Skip or I1 will be here. This is very near and dear to my heart as well. So stay on or take a break, do whatever you need to do. And we'll see everybody back at 11. Just make sure to mute and camera off if you are stepping away.
And I'm putting the slides in the shared folder right now. And I will also give you Alba's scale.
Do I have a link to the shared folder?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I can
Good point.
add it to the SharePoint site.
Yeah.
Building it as you guys are sharing links in the chat.
Okay, let's see here. Great. Yeah, let me get that link for you. Shasta, is it okay if I just email you that link?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
And then I'll get it over to Becca.
Is it
Okay.
not? Do you not have access to the chat? That might be.
Oh, I'm sorry. Of course. Yeah.
Oh no, I didn't know that
How
was.
about that? Yeah, I know. Oh my gosh, I need
It's
another cup of
Saturday.
tea.
And sometimes I had one person, a couple people last month or the month before that didn't have access to the chat, and I thought I fixed the problem, so that's why I asked.
Yeah, yeah, there it is. Great.
Awesome, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It's all there. Good deal.
Do I need any redirection or anything? I don't know. I always feel weird when I skip over a lot of slides, but I didn't want to just cover stuff that they didn't really need. But it makes it a little slippier, more slippery for me. So
No, I think it's good because I think you have to start. I always say this, right? Every time that you share this sort of information, like we need to like have 4 hours. You do the first two and I do the next two because that's just how our presentations kind of work. But I feel like that you have to have that information. You have to start with core. You just have to, because we can't have these other conversations, particularly around referral and evaluation, without talking about what's happening in core first.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, as you know, there's that whole locus of control thing, right? There's what happens with special ed and the influence or control that our doses have versus what MTSS coordinator has versus what instructional leaders, like there's just all
Yeah.
these pieces. But I think that what you said around just there has to be a system for this. It has to be a very tight system. My implementation science brain is like, yes, there has to be a system for this. It has to be very tight and documented. I think it's good. I think it's really good. And I'm thinking, based on what I know of your information and presentations, you're going to get a little bit deeper into some of that. We're in that evaluation phase, second half. Is that where you're going next? Okay. I think they're going to be very intrigued with that.
Okay. So I'm glad you said that, because that's what I did last night, because that's a school psychology domain, but I went ahead and I just grabbed slides that I would normally give to them. And I thought I would show it because it does have a lot of implications for evaluation design. And that Roger Lacey, which I assume is still kind of Greta's approach too, is that, if you're going to veer off the path at all, you better make sure that you do all that in the evaluation phase, and that you're not shopping for, that was Roger's term. I like that. You're not shopping for a disability or whatever. You're saying, we're really challenged by the fact that we're going to have to use interpreters. This kid speaks Somali. We don't have any tests in Somali, those kinds of things. But those conversations need to happen at that first ARC meeting, so that there's a real clear, systematic approach to picking those things. Anyway, but you jump in.
When did this letter from Roger, when did you get this?
That was done, so many years ago. It caused a huge ripple through our
When I'm
region.
sitting here, I'm thinking now with all the new SLD guidance that came out, I'm like, we need to revisit this probably.
Yeah, it came out. I'll tell you this. It came out. Our ML. We had an ML evaluation team in Warren County, and it came out right about then. So that would have been. I retired in 19. I'd say 16 or 17, something like that. In that. And I tell you, I can even take it out of the folder. I was reticent to put it in the folder, because it is old, But to me, it kind of shows a way that Greta and Roger were thinking about it at that point that really helped us, because we knew that we had to go back and change our policies.
No, I don't. Not saying you have to take it out. Don't think that. I would just make sure that people know the date on it, because again, with new SLD guidance, I know that's causing some, some hoopla right now. So just wanted to make sure that anytime you post anything like that, if you don't mind, make sure that there's a date, so that we can think about chronologically how that guidance has morphed or changed over time.
That's a good point. Well, I'll talk about the date for sure.
Okay.
It was shared with me without the date, so that's why I just grabbed it, and I use it more as a training point than current guidance,
But what I'll do is I'll look at it, and I'll look at it, and then I'll just get some feedback and say, hey, is this still on par with what we're thinking in terms of our current SLD guidance, and just to make sure, and I'll let you know. But
I say, why is that not happening?
I'd ask a question for everybody gets on here. This second part, I think what we're seeing most, or I hope, I don't know if this is a good question or not, but is there going to be any guidance kind of around what we're seeing with our increase in EL population is at evaluation components at the, for our preschoolers that are incoming, that are DD social, and looking at this communication piece and this over identification of DD social and autism. That is the biggest thing that we're seeing right now, is we have an influx of children who, even when we're given the parent surveys, they're not quite culturally understanding what it's asking, if that makes sense. Especially for we're seeing a big the Congo, that dialect of French, and getting that translated in the correct ways is super, super difficult. So you guys have any guidance? Will you kind of talk about that at all?
Well, not that specifically. I mean, I'm really nervous, as you're kind of implying. I'm nervous about a kid that young who's just come to the United States about making any big determinations about, unless these are probably refugees, unless the Department of State health interview, which is done prior to their departure. And they'll do a full, they have doctors, psychiatrists, they'll go through a full battery. So typically that'll be flagged. They'll say, well, for this case, who's arriving, there's, concern that there might be autism. There's concern there might be cognitive or intellectual disabilities. I don't know. I'm really nervous about something that young because as you said, our cultural frame is so different from the cultural frame of the Congo. And if they were in a refugee camp, and I don't like to overgeneralize this either, but the boys in particular that I've encountered over the years who come from those camps are just crazy for the first several months until they kind of get this routine, because the camps are crazy. I mean, the kids are running around and it just takes a lot of time for it. And of course, they don't have a lot of frontal cortex at that age anyway, but just, being able to slow down, make decisions. Impulsivity is a huge issue for those kids.
Like the health records, even us knowing district wise how to get that. And I don't know if in Warren County, I think we're seeing an influx in particular in Northern Kentucky because Amazon.
Yes.
And there's a recruitment and there's a partnership. And also Louisville seeing it, I think, in Jefferson because of Amazon as well. And there's like a short term, or there's a solution. I know they're opening up like 2 Bezos centers for early childhood in Louisville in 2025. But in Northern Kentucky, we're seeing a huge influx of that. So even getting, how does it, as a district, how do we get those, how do we talk to families to even get that information would be great.
Sure.
Any
I'm glad.
suggestions?
I'm so glad you said that, Nicole. I mean, wasn't even going to talk about community partnerships. I mentioned ours very briefly, but for districts that are starting to serve like very diverse people, I just think that's pivotal, because if you have a meeting once a month that the school hosts and you have doctors and health departments and all sorts of mental health professionals, they're all coming to these meetings, and you're saying, okay, I'm having these issues. Do you guys have any input? And I've seen our team say, let's just form a committee. Who wants to join the committee? And we're gonna come up with some resources for early child whatever. And it's amazing what you can wield when you've got a full community involved. And then Western Kentucky University, at our health fair that we did every year before COVID, we haven't resurrected it since COVID, but University of Louisville got very involved and sent a lot of people down from their various clinics. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's something that's really important on the pre-refer, the prior to referral side, just ensuring that they're getting what they need, because I would be really uncomfortable with a very young kid being subjected to, okay, we think there might be autism. Whoa, I think our instruments are not culturally responsive enough. Our framework as practitioners is not refined in many cases. It's tough. I'm always careful. I'm very reticent in those situations.
Skip, I want to say too, while you're getting your slides and stuff ready to hop back into things, I just want to share too, if you guys have questions, if you have these lingering questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to either me or Skip. And I'm going to say me for one reason. Here's why: because all of our guidance documents are data driven, meaning that when a guidance document is developed, it's because we have a lot of data that says this guidance is needed. And so as you guys ask questions, I may refer you over to Skip, right? Or I may say, hey, go talk to this person or that person. But what happens is I get to collect that data and say, hey, our districts have these questions. Our districts need support here. And that sort of helps propel that decision to say, hey, there needs to be some guidance around this topic. And so, please don't hesitate to ask. There is never a like, oh, I'm telling, like, it's never, ever that way. So please, please, please reach out to me with any questions you have, no matter how silly they may seem. Skip and I both recognize, like he said, we are all in different places across the state where we have some of our teams have had ELs and NLs for a very long time. And so they're sort of like refining some of their processes and getting very deep into that evaluation process. As for some of our districts, this is very new, right? We're just seeing this influx of these kiddos, and we want to do our best to support them. And so how do we even get started with this process? So please, for sure, anytime you have a question, please email me, call me. And again, that just sort of helps me say, hey, we need to put some official guidance out around this. So do that. And like I said, if I don't know the answer, there's a good chance I might not. I might say, hey, you know who's really great at this? Skip. I'm going to send you over to him. So anyway, all of that, Skip, I'm going to give the stage back to you.
Okay, great. And we had really good conversations during the break. And so I want to kind of start there because I did skip. You have the slides now. They're all in the slide deck or in the resource folder. And so you can contact me or anything like that. But I chose to skip a lot of slides, and I was telling Shasta that creates kind of a slippery slope for me because I just want to make sure that I'm, covering the bases. But I do want to open up with a couple of points that came up during the break. First of all, there really are major turf issues here, not in the bad turf sense, but gen ed is gen ed. MTSS is MTSS, and then your world of DOS and exceptional education, that's another world. I find in these cases, probably the best thing you can do is if you're on that district academic team or learning services team, I would say for these cases, you guys need to just link arms and say, we have to coordinate. Okay, we have to maintain that connection. That was really useful for us. The other thing I'll say again, I'll reiterate, because I made the point before the break, but I'll say it again, there needs to be a system. So one of the finest school psychologists I know and who does this work day in and day out, I'm always on her because, I say it wouldn't be, it would, I wouldn't, I see NYU saying you need to come up here and teach. Well, all of a sudden Warren County loses this resource. So if you don't have the system needs to be in place. There needs to be a protocol for addressing all of these considerations. So I'll jump back into it. Nicole during the break had some really great points that about our Congolese. That's one of the biggest African populations coming. But of course we have Burmese populations who are here. We have a lot of Middle Eastern and Afghanistan residents who are now living here. So one of the things I said, and then I'll jump back into my slide deck, is that because this really does reside in the prior to referral thing, is that we do need to have a system in place for sharing the wealth on this. Okay, so I mentioned a community partnership that we have here in Warren County. Started out small, started with about 4 people, the 2 school districts, maybe the health department. I think that was it. Public library, they started coming right away. Now it's about 70 people. And we meet and we have, the University of Louisville has participated in a lot of our stuff. The UK Medical School has been involved, Western, of course, health department, mental health agencies, they're all in the room. So when we have situations in which we're wondering about, we have a kid who's being referred for autism or some sort of behavioral issue, and they're not from this country, when you have relationships like that, you can just reach out to someone and say, I need help on this case. And if they're a member of this group that has been developed, then, it's really helpful. So, and the other thing I would say there, and then I'll jump back into the slides, is cultural brokers. So if you can find someone in the Congolese community, now they're a really wonderful community in this state, and they've organized themselves, they're leaders. On my phone right now, I have a WhatsApp group of all the religious and ethnic community leaders in Warren County. And so I can reach out to them and just say, we have whatever situation I need help with, and reach out to them. So your cultural brokers, someone who has direct experience with life in the Congo, life in the refugee camp, life in Burma, life in Jordan, your imams in the mosques are great because and I leveraged ours a lot with boys, mainly high school age boys who were being high school age boys. But when the imam shows up at school, and has a talk with them, then things really start to move. So forging those partnerships with, your community health agencies, mental health agencies, and so on, law enforcement, all those, and also your cultural brokers. They're really, really worthwhile. All right. So thanks for all that great conversation in the middle. And just to calibrate, so what do you have on your timer, Shasta, right now? About how much time?
Sorry, I was talking, I was on mute. It is 11:10, and our plan is to go into breakout rooms at 11:35.
Okay, so 25 minutes. Cool.
Yeah.
All right, I'll start the timer. All right, so back to the slides. And we were in the evaluation design area. And I was telling Shasta during the break, this is something I'm more comfortable with school psychologists, but I do think as the dose, you are someone who is, maintaining the ship. Like you're keeping it in sound waters and things like that. So if you don't mind, I'm going to skip to another presentation and show you a few slides that I normally give to school psychs. But back to this. So we're picking common standardized tests for these cases 9 times out of 10. Well, it depends. If you're in Warren County, it could be 7 times out of 10. And Fayette and Boone and other places, it's also maybe 7 times out of 10. But all these tests were developed for kids who live in this culture, in the dominant culture in the United States. They were developed for that purpose, and they just aren't appropriate for our other kids. They're not culturally appropriate. There are lots of reasons why they're not appropriate in many cases. First of all, this will dovetail with the slides I'll show you in just a second, but it's really important for a student that we're testing to be represented in the norm sample of the test. So we don't want to compare a kid to a group of other kids that don't represent them. So your Congolese refugees, your Guatemalans who come up unaccompanied, arrive at the border and are sent to live with a sponsor in Lexington, that's not represented in the testing sample, or in the norm sample. The other thing is that we really need to be testing, and this was mentioned at the very start in my marching order, so I do want to address this. We're going to be testing in both languages. So, and I'll give you the reasons in just a second, but if you really want to have a full picture of what a kid who's bilingual or multilingual can do, you need to be assessing them in both languages. So that means we're going to have an interpreter. Well, that really, and I'm a school psych, I can say this with all my heart, that kills us because we have to interrupt the standardized procedures. We have to vary from those. So that's hard. We're also not going to keep the same time limits possibly. So we're varying, and once we vary from that, then it starts to do some things in terms of our ability to make decisions on scores, which is what we like to do. It's easy to do that. So the native language assessments that were out there, and this was mentioned earlier too, is that we do have Spanish versions of tests. I have seen another test that was the bilingual verbal ability test that you could also get a few other languages, not many, but there are challenges. So it's because we have a lot more languages than Spanish in our state. So there are challenges with regard to that. With Spanish, and I used to have to deal with this quite a bit when I was actually working as a school psych. The dialect of Spanish that's used in the Spanish translation is often very inappropriate for the kid who's sitting in front of us. And I had interpreters who would go with me and they would say, I'm going to ask this item in the wording of the test, but it's not appropriate because this kid from Peru doesn't use that word for a car. They don't use that word for, whatever. So the dialect of Spanish being used, which is, as you guys probably know, it varies across the countries very significantly. The vocabulary that are used, the expressions, and so on. But it's very clear that we do need to be testing, in both languages. So if you really want to know the funds of information and you want to know what a kid understands and can do, and they're multilingual, the way to access all of that information is through both language pathways. And that's a tough one. That's a real tough one for school psychologists to take in and understand. I think what predominates in this area is this idea that we have two kids. We have the kid who speaks Spanish inside the brain, and we have the kid who speaks English inside the brain. And we have these two very distinct, not distinct, but distinct personas. And that's not the case. They only have one brain, and they have this very, very wonderful and wide capacity to communicate. And we need to embrace that and honor it by asking into things. So anyway, I think I've made that point well enough.
Skip, if you're sharing slides, we can't see them.
Oh no. Oh, I'm so sorry, you all.
That's okay. It's like I think he has slides for this, but he can't see them. So while you get that pulled up, I will share with you guys. It's going to be really weird font because I copied it out of a PowerPoint. But there is the DOJ and Ed did a joint letter on ensuring English learners can participate in educational programs. And it says to avoid inappropriately identifying EL students with disabilities, they should be evaluated in an appropriate language based on the student's language skills and needs. So I'm going to drop that in there just so you guys have it as well. And I apologize for how wonky it's going to look.
No worries. And I apologize for not sharing these slides. But anyway, we've only covered maybe 4 slides. So thanks for pointing that out, Shasta. So the final points on evaluation design, I'll skip over to this other slide deck. But we all know Shasta. You can look at her great stuff on the KD website. We know about the legal mandates to assess multilingual learners with instruments in a manner that will not be discriminatory. We all know that. So it will be important, though, to document in that meeting. So I always lean on school psychologists their report needs to be considerably different than that it would be for a native English speaker. But that ARC meeting, the conference summary needs to really talk about the degree to which evaluation process is going to be impacted by any accommodations that you do to not discriminate. So those interpreters, non-standard assessments, more observations than we typically do, breaking the standardization rules, qualitative versus quantitative. With school psychs, I do discuss with them that our border states, 2 of our border states, Virginia doesn't allow any standard scores in their reports. So if a kid arrives from Virginia, which they do, fairly often, they won't have those scores in there. Tennessee is an MTSS state, so you might see some standard scores in there, but not often. Okay. I'm just having trouble getting myself together here. I apologize. So I'm going to skip over to the other slide deck that I use with school psychs and start off with a cartoon. Just testing in general is really, it's a really hard thing. And the more now that I've been a school psychologist, I don't practice as a school psych anymore, but I entered the field in 1989. I'm even more dubious about testing than I was back in the day, but I know it's a necessary evil. I prefer the collection of data to make determinations. So this is a quote from Rhodes, Ochoa, and Ortiz in a great book. It's old now. It's hard to believe it's this old, but
I don't think we're on the same.
I say we're still
slide
seeing
deck as
evaluation
you.
design.
Are you? Oh, wow. So why would that?
This is
Okay, let
because
me
you
get out.
use Google. This is because your Greek people use Google Meet, and now you don't know how to use anything else.
All right. Okay. I know what I'm going to do now. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Now we're here. Is it better? Can you see it?
Yes, we see your cartoon.
Okay. You all. I'm sorry. Well, Saturday too. That's part of it. So there's a quote from Rhodes, Ochoa, and Ortiz. In its current form, the assessment of students who are culturally and linguistically diverse is at best a work in progress, and at worst, a biased and damaging process. And that sounds, 2005, that was the that was the ethos at that time. It's calmed down somewhat, but I really hope as those you will sort of think about that, just kind of keep that as you're talking to school psychologists, as you're kind of working with the case, and particularly in that evaluation design, is that you mitigate the problems with standardized testing by saying, okay, we're going to get a lot more stuff. We're going to have a lot of, we have a system for this. We have a system, and we're going to have a lot more observation. We're going to have scales that are not formal. We're going to talk to the parents a lot, and we're going to build up our data, and I'll show you what we're going to do with that in just a few minutes. So again, this is what I share with school psychs, and you guys know this better than anyone, but I just thought I would hit it. It needs to be full and individual. I've kind of bolded the important stuff. Can't be discriminatory on a racial or cultural basis. It needs to be administered in the child's native language and yield accurate information on what the child knows and can do, unless it's not clearly feasible to do so. And in the standardized realm, it's often not feasible to do so. You know, there's no Congolese intelligence tests that I know of. So, and they're not available here, and it would be very difficult to even do them. But so, you know, what we're using someone who speaks Swahili or someone who speaks their native language, and we're asking the items on the instrument, and we're using those. And we can't really use them in a standardized sense anymore, but we can use them. They're really useful for determining cognitive skills like short-term memory, quantitative reasoning, and those kinds of those typical intelligence test areas.
If you don't mind, a
Yeah.
question that I get a lot, and I think it may be helpful to this team as well, is, we know the reg says the tests are to evaluate in the language most likely to yield accurate results. And could we just talk about for a minute breaking that language down a little bit in terms of, like, so as an example, the kiddo who's been here since kinder, who's now an 8th grader and has been receiving instruction in English since kinder, versus the 8th grader who has only been here for 2 years. Can we just, because there's a difference there. So could you just expand on that a little bit, in that most likely to yield accurate information?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I see it more from a non-standard perspective at this point, because we are trying to determine, and I think it's coming up in a slide in just a few minutes, but that idea of is this, and there's my brain is going, I have another slide from some guidance I've just given to a district. But anyway, what we're looking for is a problem that is just will not go away. It can be an academic area, or it can be or wherever. So RTIs or MTSS is where we're going to gather the data on that. And then when we get into a testing situation, in order to flesh out the idea that maybe they were able to do it, but we didn't do it in their native language. So there will be a lot of probes like that. And that's how I've always interpreted that part of the reg, is that we're trying to accurately determine, we're not going to let language get in the way. So language can be the first thing to ruin our accuracy, our content validity in the psychometric sense. So if we give them an instrument that is one of the best math tests out there, man, it's great. We spend a lot of money on this math test, but the language load of that test is so high that the kid is not able to really give you what they know. So that's how I interpret that test. Is I would say then the interpreter needs to weigh in at that point and say, let me go after this in Swahili, and let me try to get to the bottom of this in Swahili. And it could be that we just set the test aside and we just start doing some probes. It's literally going to be, I know this is hard to, because special ed is so, there's such a system to it, and the way we think about it is so wonderful with our score cutoffs and that sort of thing. But we are on the path. I love that part of the reg, because we are on the path of trying to find very accurately, what do they know? Like, what can they do? And we may need to, we're going to definitely use their native language for that. Does that help, or did I answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely expands on it a little bit. And again, just thinking about, you talked a lot about having a data in the system, right? What does your already previously collected data? And again, that evaluation procedure is likely not going to look exactly the same again for the 8th grader who's been here since kinder versus the 8th grader who's been here for a year or two. You're going to have some very different potentially some very different data sets and evaluation procedures and sorts of things in some shifts, so that's a kind of the thing. That I get that there's a lot. And I think also we get that, well, what if they're former L, right? But now they've exited again,
Right.
that's going to totally impact your evaluation procedures and things. So.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I know. I'm always having school psychs who really want to stick to their way of doing things, which I totally get. And so they're always going, well, but they've been here for a long time and they exited ESL. But if you attend any of the trainings we do with regard to English language development, we're always talking about the schema that these kids arrive with, which does impact. Now, 8th grader, those early schema may not continue to play into everything. There are all sorts of factors with the 8th grader, really, and with the kid who's very young. But again, what we're trying to do is go after, and I'll refer to the reg again, what they know and can do, and that's involving schema, previously acquired schema. In fact, I'll use an example. So early in the war, between Israel and Gaza, the UN commissioner felt so strongly about something, and this is a typical European or Middle Easterner who speaks multitudes of languages. And he said, I want to be so clear about this, I'm going to say it in English. So, I always think about that, or situations like that, because I know kids who have said, the only way I can tell you about this, what I really know or what I really feel is if I use my native language. Is that okay? So we're kind of there. And part of your question, I thought, had to do with just how sophisticated they are in their native language. And an 8th grader may or may not be, So I know 8th grade Bosnian kids who said their parents told them when they first arrived, we're not speaking Bosnian anymore. So we're only speaking English, which creates a whole set of problems and also a whole set of good things. But again, I think our tool to drill down on that part of the reg is always have an interpreter ready for these evaluations, because you really do want to know, you want to have a complete picture of what they know and can do. So anyway, it's one of those things that's not easy. I'm looking at the time too, but it's not easy because you do have to have interpreter resources and trained interpreters, which is another ball of wax. I will say that GREC is starting to provide some interpreter training, and it's a 2-day training. They learn professional interpreting skills on the first day, and then they learn special ed specific skills on the second day. So that's kind of up and built. We're building. I think that's another point to make. I made it in the first slide, or the first set of slides, is that Kentucky is in this like 44% in the last 5 years. So we've when Shasta and I first met, I think the state was kind of moving along, this slight growth category, but we've taken this uptick over the past 5 years. So we're building infrastructure right now. So yeah, we're building infrastructure at the same time. We really need the infrastructure. So the more you can develop systems, it needs to be for your district. You're not, there's only one Warren County, one Fayette County, one Jefferson County. But so for your county, figure out what works best and just maintain that lens of, we need a system and we need MTSS, exceptional education, and gen ed. We need to be kind of joined on this endeavor, this difficult endeavor. Okay. I feel like I should stop sharing, right? And then share again and pick this one. Okay. All right. So in the last 6 minutes, documentation. You're dealing with so many complex issues that don't travel down the usual path of these evaluations or these processes that happen. So document everything. There's an OCR case. I'll see if I can find it, and I'll put it in the folder. It's not it wasn't an OCR case. It was just researchers who looked at OCR complaints in California And that's a really great article. And it just talks about, the need to document the degree to which you're going to alter the evaluation. Okay. So in the final 6 minutes, I called this working without a net. I don't know if that's a good term. I tend to have kind of a cynical sense of humor. But anyway, the best way to begin this part of the discussion is just that they can be a multilingual learner and disabled. And I think I have to say that because that there is a myth out there. It may be going away. I hope it is. That you can't be both. You can't be served in both programs. But that's completely false. The other reason we're working on the net is that beautiful score cutoff, the score ranges, the standard error of measurement, all those beautiful things that allow us to have fairly clear-cut decision making is just not present in these particular cases. So there's that kind of feeling of discomfort. So what do we do? I think Jeanette Klingner did one of the best in some of her talks back in the early 2000s. And she always considered you're eliminating possibilities. And she would use a scale as is her metaphor. And she would say, what you need to do is just load up one side of the scale with all the language and culture issues that are in place. And you just assume throughout the intervention phases and into the first meeting and so on, that this is basically an issue of language and culture. And that's the reason for the problems that we're seeing academically or behaviorally. And then from the first arc onward, and I would argue it even starts in the RTI phases or MTSS phases, you're starting to collect data and you're looking at, what could be a potential disability. One of those things I mentioned back in the MTSS section, but we can talk more about it, is the idea that if you choose a skill that is deficit and you say, we're going to go after this thing, we're going to teach it again, we're going to continue to reteach it, we're going to intervene, and we're going to really drill down on that. Alba Ortiz has talked about this quite a bit over the years, that if you don't see growth, that's evidence for disability. Even for someone who just arrived, that's evidence for disability. So they need to have an opportunity to learn. But once you begin that kind of phase of addressing that particular skill deficit, she said, give it 9 to 12 weeks. And if you don't see growth, that's a big, big indicator of a disability. So the PSP and IEP, the PSP, if you don't know, the program services plan, there's a whole wealth of, information out there about how we do English language programming, and that isn't in your wheelhouse, which is fine. But it would behoove you to know a few of those things, and I can always help too. And KDE's consultants over in that side are great. But the program services plan is a legal document. It documents their current level of functioning based on a test that was given several months before. But it indicates their language functioning in all the language domains. It specifies their instructional and assessment accommodations. And it also often has goals on it, that these are what we're addressing for the time being. And it's a legal and binding document, as I said. It's revised once a year. It can be revised in the interim with parent permission. So the federal regulations require that an English learner who's identified as having a disability needs to continue to have their language skills addressed. So those two programs do continue to, travel along together. I have heard myths out there as well that the IEP in effect trumps the PSP, and so it becomes the primary document, but that's not correct either. Again, they're both very important documents to follow. So, what I've always advised, and Shasta might have other that might be similar, might be a little bit different, but if you're going to be talking about their participation in the regular program, this is where I would reference their status as a multilingual learner, English learner. I would talk about the degree to which they're receiving their ELD programming, because we have a range of services too. We have pull out resource. We also have push in. We have all sorts of ways that we deliver English language development instruction. So, and referencing the PSP at that time as a companion document is where the reader can go to find out more about those services that are being provided. Well, 54 seconds. challenging situations for me have always been like when to give the alternate access, which is for children with significant intellectual disabilities. So we can talk about that in the question and answers. Um, Also, language services for students with severe communication disabilities. If a system of communication is being taught, um, how much do we want the ELD staff to be involved in that, and to what degree? Those are situations that I've always found were difficult to, get in and weigh and so on, because it does become an issue. At what point do we stop, teaching English vocabulary and grammar and those kinds of things? So with 10 seconds left, um, I'll pass it back over. I'll stop sharing and pass back over to Shasta.
All right, thank you, Skip. And I feel like I totally just commandeered some of your time there with that question, so I do apologize. But hopefully this information has been helpful to you guys. I know if you're like me, it probably just leads to more questions, right? But and so that's okay. What we do would like for you guys to do is we're going to hop into breakout rooms. Let me pull up our questions for our breakout rooms. Becca's going to be getting those sorted out for us. And while we do that, of course, be doing two things. One, jotting down any new questions that come to mind. We're going to have some opportunity to come back with Skip for a few minutes after breakout rooms. But then in addition, you can always hang out later. You can always email me or Skip with those questions. And we can talk about those. With special ed, right? With almost every question, well, it depends, right? It's individualized per student. So go ahead and take a snapshot of these questions so that you have them as we shift into breakout rooms. And again, just take note of any questions that arise from your conversation to bring those back to Skip at the end. And Becca, I do think Skip wants to be in a breakout room, rotate potentially, or at least be in one. So if you could make sure that he's in a space, that would be great, Becca.
Okay, yeah, that may take a second. I'm going to open the rooms, then I'll make sure that Skip gets put in one.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, he's in room 2.
Okay.
I'll just leave him there. I don't think that I can give him the ability to jump from rooms.
Yeah, I didn't know if that was possible or not.
Hey, Renee, are you having some difficulty joining your room?
Yeah, I had an internet problem when I got back in, but I was in before we went to breakout, so I don't know what happened.
Do you see the ability, like a little button or something to click to join room?
Yes, I'll try that.
Yeah. There we go. This conversation seems so impossible to.
It is.
Oh, like the
It's
amount
so big
of perseverance that someone would have to meet the needs. Well, and also I feel like, well, this is with all education, but like the amount of heart that someone has to have too. Oh.
It's such a complex issue because special education evaluations referrals all by themselves with a non-EL are difficult and challenging and highly individualized. And then when you add in this complexity and even the layers of complexity within EL, kind of like, are they a newcomer, or did they have interrupted formal education? Have they had formal education? Did they have trauma from a refugee camp? Did they have trauma as they immigrated? Like all of these things, right? All of these things, because they are definitely not a monolithic group by any means. And so it's so hard to just say, well, here's what you do. Like it's so stinking complicated, so complicated.
And the politics too, like the current day politics makes this even more fiery a topic.
Yeah, that's why anytime I talk about this and try to present on, I'm always like, it's really important that you are aware of who OCR is. And it's very important that you're aware of who the Department of Justice is. And usually we don't think about DOJ and special ed a ton like we do with like some situations. But for these kiddos, it has huge impacts on things like family engagement and if the family feels safe coming into the building. And I mean, just like all of these things, like it's so very, very big and so very huge.
Skip is just perfect to do this, though, with that background in assessment.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know many people that have that to deal with EL. And there's so many little subtle things he talked about
Mm-hmm.
that are just like just spot on, following the kid around, for a few hours. Goodness
Mm-hmm.
gracious. That is so important for the assessment, expert to really glean the nuances to their language, to their ability to process. It's just good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
another thing that comes through is sort of cultural humility, intellectual humility, and an acknowledgement that it's a team's approach, right? It's a systems level thinking that's needed to address, right? This and that he mentioned, I think, cultural brokers at one point,
Mm-hmm.
right? How important it is to network and build relationships across disciplines, across the community to meet these needs because they are so complex.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that multidisciplinary team, that's why when I presented at TESOL, I was like, I want to give the people new information. So I was like, I'm really going to focus on this multidisciplinary team because when you look at special education from all the way from tier 1 all the way to now we have an IEP, right? You, for EL kids, you cannot appropriately serve these students and support their teachers and their families without having a multidisciplinary team, without having a team of people who can speak to these situations and things. And so at TESOL, I went through the whole special ed process, the KDE identified special ed process, and said, now let's look at each one of these for ELs. Like, what's the regulation? What's the best practice? What's the regulation? What's the best practice for ELs from step 1 all the way down to we are in transition, right? And so it was really helpful, and it was so excited. I had several principals in that session. As you know, our principals are often ARC chairs with no background in special education. So it was really good. Very, like I said, I was like, I want these people to know. And so when he was talking about those community brokers and stuff, what he did as an EO coordinator when he was in Warren County at the GEO high school, which is international high school. It was so amazing. The things that were happening over there. I was like, are you serious? Is this real life? Can I drive 3 hours to work every day? I think I can. I think it's fine and I want to work here because it was just so inspiring. You know what I mean? Like, it was such a good program, the things that were happening there with their community partnerships. Like, oh, it was just
Man,
so
Chester,
good.
you're doing what you need to be doing. I mean, just hear it in your voice, man. You love this stuff. Good
I
for you.
do.
Good for you. Hey, I'm glad you mentioned that Roger Lacey
Uh-huh.
Oh yeah, yeah.
position paper. That probably worth revisiting again.
Mm-hmm.
Skip's been around so long,
Mm-hmm.
he's got that institutional memory, but other folks, do not. And so with all the changes, just might be good
Yeah.
taking a look at.
What I'm going to do is I'm gonna just kind of share it with, Amanda and Veronica and say, hey, is this something that does this still fit with the current context of SLD guidance? And if not, shoot him an email and say, hey, I mean, I'm not telling you can or you can't or whatever, but you're going to want to note the date and
Things
how
have
this
changed.
guidance
Yeah.
it either supports or contrasts with what's currently happening in this context. So yeah, but that's why I was like, what was the date on that? Because I had not seen that. So I was like, let's make sure.
Yeah. And
He's
when he
working
said
on
Roger's
something.
been gone a while.
Right, that's why I was like, wait a second, our Roger Lacey.
Yeah.
Which I still work with Roger. He's over at HDI with us now. And it fits because, he did all the monitoring, especially the big time, the technical complaint stuff. He was, he was Greta's go-to person back in the day.
Yep. And again, I haven't read it deeply enough to know if it's, like I said, on par with current guidance. But I just want to make sure that those two things don't contradict each other in any way, because it's such a, I don't know, sort of a little mess right now anyway. I know, our districts, rightfully so, are like, wait a second, it breaks for a second. What do you mean? What do you mean? So
And I will not lose track of Nicole's question because that was a preschool early
yes.
learning question, and we'll share that with the team. We lack EL expertise at the moment.
Yeah.
And we know this. We know this is an area of growth for our unit, and we've talked about it, and I anticipate we'll have this as a topic during our summer work session. And so, but this is a great example for me to bring back to the team and say, this is what we need. I've pulled up, I don't know that it's necessarily relevant at this point, but the WIDA early learning standards, and I think Lorena Mancia would be with WIDA would be an excellent resource for us at some point in that space, in that early learning space, and how to navigate it.
You hit the nail on the head with that, Bill. The whole early learning aspect of EL, goodness gracious. And Skip is a wonderful resource to even maybe pull in and talk with your team just informally like this. One of the things that he said that I want to incorporate into our the summit in June is, we talked about having an ERTC director, there to talk about kind of the early childhood aspect of it. Well, one thing is that question that he raised or someone else raised to him, how do we deal with these kids that are being assessed for DD when they've got these EL issues coming in from the Congo or even, Mexico? And I mean, that I thought, wow, you are totally right. Totally right. And a lot of these directors, preschool directors in particular, they're not going to have that level of EL expertise and school psych background to figure out what to do. And I thought Skip really kind of nailed the larger issue of, hey, I'm really cautious about those kind of kiddos in placement issues at that young of an age, because you hang that label on them and you got some big issues going on when it really just could be a cultural issue or a language issue. So anyway, I thought that was a really good question.
And it complicates, we don't formally identify ELs in Kentucky until kinder. There's not a formal assessment. So there's that piece to it. But then I think what you said was right, Bill. I think it would be really great, whether it's Andrea or an RTC person, or even both of them, to say, hey, we're seeing an influx or an increase, let me say that, an increase of our younger ELs, of younger EL students, preschool EL kids, because that is a place I'm seeing more questions as well, and saying, hey, could you just talk about that for a minute? Could you just spend a slide or two talking about supporting assumed EL kiddos, like kiddos that we think are going to be EL, but obviously, are coming from different, culturally or linguistically diverse backgrounds. I think would be very good.
Yeah, he's just good. I mean, you're spot on with him, Shasta.
Yeah, you're right. It's so rare to have that school psych brain and an EL coordinator brain, right? Like, who is this? What unicorn is this, right? Like, where did we?
It is. Now, I've met a couple school psychs that are bilingual, but that's still different than Skip. They can do a good job too. They're a little more sensitive, but they just look at it from an assessment lens. And okay, well, I can speak the kid's language and do the assessment, in their native tongue. But that EL thing is so much bigger that Skip brings that perspective. Just a good blend.
I wanted to laugh too when he was talking about like learning, when we evaluate, even Spanish is not always Spanish. And it made me laugh because I remember, so one of my best friends is from Colombia and from Mexico. We were all EL teachers at the same time. And so to help me grow my bilingual abilities, to help me be better at speaking Spanish, they would say, I would say, how do you say this in Spanish? And one of them would say this, and one of them would say, that's not right. You say this. And they were like, well, in Colombia, we say, well, Mexico, we say this. And they're like, which one do you want to go with? And I was like, I'm just going to try to learn both. And even when I'm learning like Spanish right now, it's more Spain Spanish. And so it's like, oh my gosh, this is like crazy. It's just so funny though. I remember them arguing about it in Spanish, about which was the better word and the correct word.
Yeah, I love it when different nationalities argue about how a word is pronounced. That is so hilarious.
Well, if you think about the way some of our
Nice.
English words are
Yep.
pronounced and the, what they mean, it's completely different from one culture, one side of the country to the other. It's like
Eastern Kentucky to California.
Look. Well, I said when I was at Case the other day, I said, I'm going to start presenting. I have a few minutes. I'm going to start talking really fast. And when I talk fast, my Appalachia comes out. Luckily, our KVEC friends are here. They can interpret for me. So if you don't, if you need some interpretation support, our KVEC friends can help you with that. Because it's so very true. And I showed Caden this video of he was a teacher in France, but he was teaching English to his students. And he said, here's how you say it in Britain. This is British English, and here's how you say it in American English. And he said water, and they were like water. He goes, he was like in Americano, and they was like water.
Anyway, it's funny.
So
it's like aluminium.
Aluminium.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Becky, you want to bring them back?
Aluminium. Oh yeah. Let me give them a
1 minute warning.
I got sidetracked, so sorry.
No, you're good. We were having a good conversation.
Let me give them.
I bet they are too. I'm betting that in these breakout rooms, there is no shortage of conversation.
Bill, I think it's good for you to hear all this too, because you can bring this back to your branch there. Yeah. It's good. We're all learning on this one.
I'm going to close rooms in like 30 seconds or so because I hate, it's real jarring to just like close the room.
It really is.
Have them.
Looks like what Harry Potter went through when he found a port key, like the first time he touched the boot.
That's funny.
Spun around.
Oh my gosh, I still can't get over your Harry Potter Airbnb that y'all stayed at, you and Natasha. Oh my gosh, that's so amazing.
She and I are going to Paris and London next year. And when we're in London, we're going to do some Harry Potter things while we're in London.
I was there. I saw the door.
Charing Cross Station, I think. The door.
Yes.
Yeah.
King's Cross Station. We're going to go to King's Cross, of course.
King's Cross.
Yes. Took a picture.
There'll be people in line there to get their picture taken.
Platform 9 3/4.
Yep.
9 3/4.
In British English. Quarters.
9 3/4, y'all. I don't know 9 3/4 around here.
It's fun.
All righty, friends. We predicted that you guys did not have enough time in your breakout rooms, as per usual. We predicted that. I don't know if that was accurate or not. But before we kind of switch over to the last few minutes, were there any big questions that you wanted to share with Skip? Were there any big sort of like ahas or things that you're still kind of wondering about, or things that are lingering in your brain that you just want to kind of share out loud with big group, with the big team?
This is something that it's not even like a question or it's more of one of those epiphany moments that I've had recently. So I have a student that I've worked with literally the last 4 years of his entire high school career. And just because it's a student with autism who is an EL student. And he came to us when he was in 3rd grade. So he learned to read by reading English. And so we are in the weird situation of but he speaks Spanish, but he can't read Spanish. And so when we offer him we tried to like reassess him, and we had a new school psychologist and saw that he was an EL student. The school psychologist gave him the test in Spanish. And we had the conversation with the school psychologist, like, he can't read Spanish. And it was like one of those things, like we have a lot of that also. It's like the disjunction sometimes is that they're coming here and they're in an immersion program and they're learning English. Well, they may be able to speak their native language because that's what they speak with their parents at home, but they probably can't read their native language.
Yeah.
And knowing that difference is also very tricky to navigate sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. What a great comment, Matthew. So yeah, I think as you're building this system, and I hope as a dose, you will kind of endeavor to build a team of individuals who kind of comes together and looks at these cases and provides that wisdom that you just naturally expresses, like, well, why didn't you ask me? He didn't read Spanish. So, I think the system building that system and a team approach, when you have ELD specialists on it, we always had a school psychologist represent. In fact, there were two who volunteered to be on the team. So we were able to, first of all, make great decisions. We didn't make a misstep like that because time was wasted. And the poor guy was probably sitting there going, I can't do any of this, so you don't want them to encounter something like that, but you'll avoid a lot of those situations. Now, on the other hand, his oral Spanish abilities, where he can describe, again, getting that full picture, accurate picture of what he knows and can do, is sometimes best accessed in Spanish because that's where those early memories are stored, and that's the language in which they're stored, and that early schema can be really. He's been here for a while, but that early schema is critical. I just want to say, I was in a classroom last week, and there was a girl who, a Spanish speaker from Peru, and they were talking about volcanoes, and they were just trying to surface, background. Who has background information on volcanoes? And this girl lived near a volcano. So through the use of an interpreter, she was able to talk about living in a community that had, they had sirens that went off, and the impact of family living close to a volcano. So, boy, that class just was so enriched by her early experiences. So anyway, but that's what a great scenario that was. Yeah, tough on the school psych, but what else? We had some good conversation in our group about the notion of giving time versus finding them as quickly as possible, and again, from a legal perspective, we have to go find them. The child find applies to multilingual learners and to native speakers. However, we were just making the case that, yeah, in most cases they need time. You would just never. It's a matter of finding out who they are. And I did put the ELONs in the which is the little oral language assessment. I put that in the shared resources folder. It's great. I would suggest just doing that. And you can, if you have a kid who's there, people are concerned about, you can do an academic prompt, or you could do a non-academic prompt and get them to respond in their native language first, have an interpreter there, and then rate them in 5 dimensions of language, and then do it in English. And more often than not, they'll blow the native language version out of the water. They'll talk about, everything. And then you get to the English version and they just bottom out, and that's a typical situation of someone. I would say the evidence is here. I would wait for a while on this guy, so yeah, but it's good to have the notion. We got to go find them. We have to, if they're disabled, we need to find them and give them what they need.
That reminds me, Skip, of something. Again, a Kentucky case. This week they had their keynote. He about that very thing. Like, yes, we have this responsibility of child find, 110%, right? But if we find that maybe not yet, it's still a question mark. It's still a maybe. Mm-hmm. Don't lose that kid, right? Check in a year later. Check in 2 years later. And I think that's especially true for our ELs as they kind of, learn and develop their English speaking skills, to just like, okay, maybe it's a not yet for us, but also
Yeah.
Let's keep track of this kiddo just to make sure that's not needed later. So.
Yeah.
All righty, friends, it is time for us to go. Your exit slip, your evaluation is in the documents, or it's in the chat over here. You can also use this QR code if you're like me, you like a QR. So there it is. Please complete that survey. Let us know information, what worked and what didn't. Our next Saturday session is April 27th. Is there any holidays during that week, right? I want to make sure that's correct. I know we're shifting May because of a holiday, but April, this is good, right?
And next,
Okay.
well, that'll just be with cohort 4, right?
Just be cohort 4. But you know what? Cohort 3 loves this so much, they're all going to keep showing up. I already know. They're like, we don't want our Saturday mornings back. We want to be at Leeds.
You're always welcome. Everyone's welcome.
Lots of hugs to my cohort 3 guys.
Yeah, congrats. Big
Yeah.
deal.
Congratulations.
Good job.
Awesome.
Yeah,
All righty,
well
friends,
done.
that is it. Again, if you have questions you want to hang on for, you are welcome to hang out for a little bit longer if needed. If not, you are free to go. Cohort 3, again, we